Okay, hello and welcome to this Tokyo College webinar. I'm Trent Brown. I'm one of the researchers based here at Tokyo College, and it's my pleasure to introduce today Professor David Yang from the University of Harvard, who's currently one of our invited visiting professors here at Tokyo College. So Professor Yang, as I said, is based at Harvard in the Department of Economics, and he's also the director of Harvard's Center for History and Economics. His main area of expertise is in political economy, especially in factors that influence the continuity and change in authoritarian regimes, with China being his main area of interest. His talk today is China Autocracy 2.0, and it's going to explore how and why China has shifted from the late 1970s onwards from an autocracy based on fear and coercion to one that's based more on a complex structure of incentives and new forms of information control. We're also joined today by Professor Ase Ito, who's based in the Department of Comparative Contemporary Economics here at the University of Tokyo. He's joining us online. Professor Ito is an expert on the Chinese economy and today has generously agreed to provide his reflections on Professor Yang's presentation. Before I hand it over to Professor Yang, I'd just like to say that you can submit your questions to the speakers at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We will have some time for you to then pose these questions to the speakers at the end of today's session. So with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to present at Tokyo College. Let me share my screen. Let me see my screen well. Okay, great. So my talk today is about China, and the aim of the presentation is try to provide a new framework to try to understand what keeps China stable and prosperous, and where China might be heading in the future. Okay, so it will make a bit more sense when later in the talk of what autocracy 2.0 means as I elaborate. I will try to bring some of the ongoing research that empirical research that we have been doing over the last couple of years to try to substantiate some of the claims that I make. But bear in mind that this is very much sort of try to synthesize the argument that many scholars in this area have been making. Okay, so let me start with a more broader motivation, which is a political economy consensus that has been sort of shared among the scholars over the last at least 40, 50 years, which is that autocratic regimes are fundamentally incompatible with growth and innovation. This very much sort of guides the how we teach graduate students about sort of political institution and its relationship with economic growth and innovation. And it comes in various forms. It can go with inclusive institutions, democratic institution provides key features that can generate growth and innovation. And on the other direction, when the country grows and then become richer, the population is going to start to demand for democratic political rights and inclusive institution. And so growth and these institutions go hand in hand. Okay, so this is one version of this argument is very much sort of summarized in the book Why Nations Fail by Daron Morgan and James Robinson, who shared the Nobel Prize last year. So in other words, this is very much sort of the building block of political economy for the last sort of 30, 40 years. Now, while it is on average true that democracy is strongly possibly correlated with higher growth and higher innovation, there's one big exception, which the literature calls the China puzzle, which is that China really sort of fall out of this regularity. No, as you probably all are aware of, over the last 40 years, China's growth has really been spectacular. I'm going to talk a little bit about the recent slowdown of the economic growth in a bit later. But over the 40 years since 1980, China really has grown at a pretty remarkable speed, a record-breaking speed of the size, and really grown into a very large economic and in particular manufacturing powerhouse. As the economy has grown, China has also become, especially in recent years, a global center for innovation and has pushed the frontier innovation in several sectors at least. And one can measure this by the total number of patents being filed, the total number of top-cited patents around the world that's being filed by the Chinese innovators and so on. And many of such measures will show the China is rapidly catching up to the leadership of the United States and Europe. Okay. Chinese population, at least a sort of a fraction of them are also highly educated. More than 8 million students are graduating from the university per year, and more than 500,000 students are studying abroad. So this is a very highly educated population and oftentimes sort of internationally educated. A large part of the population also has access to fast internet. This is relatively a high rate of internet connection relative to other developing countries. And many people have the opportunity to visit abroad and travel. Okay? So in other words, China is a country that has grown, has become fairly innovative, has become very educated in terms of receiving modern education, and has remained fairly open in terms of human exchange and a lot of the other sort of economic exchanges. This is all happening against the political backdrop of the political institution in China remain fairly stable as autocracy. Now, regardless of how you want to measure that, based on politics score, based on Freedom House rating, China ranks around towards the bottom around the globe in terms of its political rights, political freedom, and civil liberties. Okay, so that's essentially the China puzzle. How do you have a country that has a political institution that's not democratic, if anything, remain very strongly, stably autocratic, but has grown into a very flourishing and open, innovative economy, which really challenges this prevailing political economy consensus. So this is the question that I would attempt to try to answer in today's talk. So as the title of the talk suggests, I'm gonna try to argue that China today exemplifies a new form of autocracy 2.0, that's going to be very different from the traditional autocracy 1.0 that one might be familiar with. Now, before I talk about sort of the details about what autocracy 2.0 means, I will want to start first with a very brief discussion about the two fundamental challenges that any autocratic countries or regime has to face and potentially resolve, which is the lack of credible commitments by the regime and the lack of credible information within the system. Now, with these two challenges in mind, I would discuss how autocracy 1.0, the familiar version, the traditional version of autocracy, how they resolve these challenges. And then I will spend much of the time today to talk about how autocracy 2.0, again, China is the prime example of that, navigate this challenge in a very different way and that depart itself from autocracy 1.0. In particular, I would mention that China uses economic incentive and aspirations, both among the citizens, but also among the politicians and entrepreneurs, to provide some of the credible commitment, to resolve some of the credible commitment problem that autocracy faces, and then align these agents with the regime's survival and the regime's sort of flourishing. I will also mention how the autocracy 2.0 uses various bureaucratic structure and technology to resolve some of the information challenges that it allows itself to operate and remain stable even in a high information environment. Okay, so these new approaches is going to allow countries such as China in autocracy 2.0 to survive and in some cases, in some sort of periods, even thrive economically by resolving credible commitment problem and also sort of situate itself in a high information environment. That's very different, as you will see in a second, from autocracy 1.0. Okay, so I'm going to provide also some empirical evidence on illustrating how autocracy 2.0 in China works. And finally, I will spend sort of the last bits of time we have today to talk about where China's heading in the future, or what does autocracy 3.0 looks like, and as China is potentially sort of leaving the current state of autocracy 2.0, it's going to matter for both China and also for the rest of the world in terms of where we think sort of autocracy 3.0 will look like. Okay, so that's going to be the structure of my talk today. Now, let me start first with autocracy's fundamental challenges. Let me emphasize that these are going to be fundamental challenges that any autocracy, China, and many other sort of countries with similar political institutions faces. And these are fundamental challenges that one has to sort of to choose a trade-off, but we cannot sort of get rid of these challenges completely. These are sort of building to the nature of autocracy. Okay, so first challenge is that autocracies are fundamentally unable to make credible commitments. And the reasons, in briefly, is that for those who control the political power, they cannot credibly commit to not use it. Okay, to give you an example, that if I'm an incumbent political sort of a ruler of autocracy, I cannot commit to a potential challenger of the regime to say I'm not going to use forces to remove you once you have supported me to survive in the next period. Because once I've survived in the next period, there's no one who can constrain my use of political power, and I can use my uncontrolled political power to remove any political enemy I wish. In a similar way that sort of for entrepreneurs, the autocracy cannot credibly commit to not expropriate their wealth or their assets because in the next period, when those wealth and assets are being created, the autocracy can always use its power to expropriate, and there's nothing they can do to issue that credible commitment. And this is going to be a quite fundamental issue, because without credible commitments, everyone in the system is going to either hesitant of voicing political support, or hesitant of making sufficient economic investments, which is going to be extremely important for generating growth and innovation. Okay, so that's challenge number one that autocracy has to face. Challenge number two is that autocracies lack credible information about both about their citizens, but also about local conditions. In fact, the more repressive an autocracy is towards elections, open elections, civil societies, the press, and so on, the more severely it deprives itself from information. In other words, democracy, elections, and civil societies, and then freedom of speech and freedom of the press, these are some of the most effective information aggregation mechanisms that can provide both the citizens, but also the rulers, about what's the truthful information that's happening to the country. When those information are being suppressed because of the autocratic institution, those information are also not available in many cases to the autocrats themselves, and that oftentimes is attributed as one of the main reason why major disasters such as the famine in the 1960s in China occurred, such as events such as COVID breaks out because of the early period lack of information transmission between local officials and central government. Okay? So these two fundamental challenges poses two trade-offs. The first one is that because autocracy cannot make credible commitments, there is a fundamental trade-off between how much political power the autocracy is going to hold onto and how much credibility it can issue to the agents into the society. The second part, fundamental challenges, sort of implies a trade-off between control and information. The more control that you want the autocracy sort of establish into the regime, the less or the fewer, the lower quality information it has available into the system, and that's going to be a trade-off that it has to navigate. So now, with these two challenges in mind, let's think about how Autocracy 1.0 deal with this problem. Again, these should be the sort of the more standard and conventional sort of version of the political regime. Autocracy 1.0 basically does not resolve the credible commitment problem to the citizens or the political officials. The regime is going to rely very heavily on coercive measures to maintain control. Okay, it's going to exert authority and ensure compliance within the system, uses harsh forces, uses overt actions of repression to cultivate sort of fear, so that the population and politicians comply and don't rebel. In other words, this is an equilibrium in which there's no credible commitments because political power is very much concentrated by the regime, and also there's very little information because the information is because the system is so repressed, so that there's no free press, and then citizens are not voicing their opinions, and sort of there's no information that's flowing. Effectiveness of the system very much is going to hinge on the regime's ability to enforce those strong controls and be able to operate in a scarce and information environment. And many sort of autocracies, stable autocracies, are in this mode, and very much so. We think that China, starting from 1949, since its founding to the late 70s, when the country starts to reform and open, are operating under this equilibrium of autocracy 1.0. Okay, now, clearly, this is not the type of autocracy regime environment that I described earlier, where China is economically flourishing. The border is open, the population is educated, and there's oftentimes a lot of information that's being flowed. Okay, what does the China sort of over the last sort of a couple of decades look like, and how they navigate those two challenges? This is what I will introduce as autocracy 2.0, how China is moving to a very different equilibrium as it seeks to resolve these challenges. Okay, the first sort of a part I will mention is that what China has done sort of in various sort of mechanisms is try to make the credible commitment problem at least partially resolved. And this is going to be a really not a trivial matter. It's going to, because of the credible commitment problem being partially resolved among the various agents in the population, it's going to unleash a lot of the energy for the and potential sort of sources of stability among the population and so on. So let me give you a couple of examples. So among the citizens, there are various mechanisms through which this can operate. You can think about sort of the ways in which citizens' actual economic opportunities or perceived economic opportunities, their upward mobility, both in an objective way or the perceived sort of subjective mobility, or if you think about sort of in the urban middle class, the actual ownership of the real estate that many of the urban middle class are having. These are economic mechanisms that's going to make citizens align with both economic growth, because they're going to anticipate sort of the bigger share or the bigger sort of personal gains that they can extract from the economic growth, and also being aligned with social stability. Right? If you're a property owner, you're going to be very much sort of aligned with potential social stability, because that's going to very much protect the property value, and these sort of economic opportunities and very importantly upward mobility among the urban middle class is going to make citizens sort of receive some credible commitments that sort of they're going to receive economic rents as the country grows. Okay. A very distinct mechanism is happening among the political bureaucrats. Now, China has used a centralized system for personnel management, where the central government runs political promotion among the politicians based on tournament of local political local economic performance. So whichever local government's local jurisdiction's economy has grown the fastest, that particular local politician is going to have a higher chance of being promoted. This particular way of managing sort of political bureaucrats sort of promotion hierarchy is going to very importantly generate credible commitments for the bureaucrats to be aligned with the regime, that they shouldn't extract and they should provide various sort of, institutional protection to the local business, for example, because they're going to be aligned with local economic growth, because that alignment is going to also make them politically more likely to be advanced. Okay? The third example, which I'll provide you with some concrete empirical evidence on, which is that among entrepreneurs, they also face a credible commitment problem in Autocracy 1.0. Right? If I'm an innovator or entrepreneur, I'm not going to willing to invest a lot of my personal assets or investors' assets into innovation because I'm going to worry about me being expropriated tomorrow when my business grows very large. Now, in Autocracy 2.0, if the regime can manage to use certain outputs of the innovators' enterprises, where those outputs can directly enhance the regime's survival stability, that's going to provide the credible commitments where the entrepreneur is going to understand that my product or my innovation output is going to really help the regime to survive, and the regime is not going to have incentive to expropriate me, and that's going to generate sort of the alignment and then the partial credible commitment that I'm not going to be more comfortable that the expropriation risk is going to be fairly low, and I'm going to start to invest in the innovation in a sufficient manner. Okay, these are very abstract sort of a discussion, I realize. So let me give you some concrete example based on some of the recent research that we've done. Okay? So in a recent project, along with a few collaborators, we've collected data on all the face recognition AI companies in China who can potentially provide a technology that really help the regime to use this technology to survey the population and enhance its ability to remain political stability. And we would link sort of these face recognition companies entity with about 10,000 public security procurement contracts that various levels of the Chinese government have issued over the last decade, where, for example, a police department is going to potentially procure face recognition AI software among one of these 7,000 firms to help them enhance the political sort of local political stability. Okay. We also, in the background, is going to observe the occurrence of protests happening across China, where politicians are going to have a strong incentive to potentially suppress those protests or make sure the protests don't occur, and maybe with the aid of this of such technology. Okay. So what I plotted in this particular figure is that for each locality, for each locality, which is county government in China, I'm plotting sort of the quarters relative to the moment in which those localities have experienced a local political unrest to quarters that those unrest took place afterwards. So the red line is marking the quarter in which those unrest occurred. On the y-axis, I'm plotting the likelihood in which the local police department, where those potential unrest occurring localities are issuing procurement contracts with those facial recognition AI companies to purchase those technology. Okay, so what you see from this figure is that the line remains fairly flat leading up to the quarter in which unrest occurs. So the local police department are not preemptively buying face recognition AI software, anticipating unrest occurs. But as soon as the unrest took place, about a quarter afterwards, you will see sort of a very large increase in the likelihood of local police departments start to buy face recognition AI software platform from these companies. Okay, so those means that these frontier technology, face recognition AI technology, again, is sort of over the last decade, is a technology that has a very strong political demand. Right? The local governments who have experienced large unrest are particularly demanding the technology, potentially with intention to use the technology to enhance the surveillance capacity and to make sure the protests don't occur in the future, which I'll show you in a second. But the reason I bring this up is that this way of politically demanding this technology, which is a frontier technology, really help resolve some of the credible commitments that the face recognition AI entrepreneurs are facing. Now they understand that when the regimes is sort of survivalhood is potentially dependent on my product, then the regime is not going to expropriate my company's sort of assets because I'm providing some of the key mechanisms or key technologies to enhance the regime's survivalhood. And that alignment and that sort of understanding is going to make them realize sort of the expropriation risk is going to decrease despite sort of the political institutions still being autocratic, and they're going to start to potentially invest and then start to try to innovate in this regard. Okay, so that's number one. How in Autocracy 2.0 the country is trying to resolve at least partially some of the credible commitments problem. Now let's move to the second sort of challenges, which is the information lack of information that the autocracy is facing. The more repressive the regime becomes, the fewer the information, the fewer high quality information the regime has in its access. Now, there are several ways in which Autocracy 2.0 in China is resolving this trade-off. The first one is that they're moving towards along the trade-off, moving towards a more information, more open environment. We see sort of the country become more tolerant about citizens accessing sensitive information, allowing for porous censorship to allow citizens, for example, to acquire some sensitive information through access to internet or even access to uncensored internet, allowing citizens to travel abroad to receive information, allowing protests to occur, at least up to a certain magnitude, allow for the first 2 decades of the country reform opening to allow local elections to take place. All these are mechanisms in which the governments are moving towards the trade-off of reducing the control and letting more information flowing along that trade-off. A second way in which the information trade-off can be resolved is that they can also move not only along the trade-off but also pushing the frontier of the trade-off. They can use technology to let the regime to enhance more level or more effective level of control, given the same level of information that they can collect or can flow into the system. Okay, so technology is going to be very much useful in this regard to try to enhance the efficiency of the regime's ability to use the information and in the capacity to control, which I'll give you an example of. And the sort of the ultimate question to link back to the China puzzle is that one might imagine that sort of as the country as the technology become very sort of explicitly politically used, it might distort or it might slow down technological advancements because the technology is not sort of potentially generated for a more general purpose, and that may still not be very useful for the overall growth, which I will show you sort of in a second. At least in the case of artificial intelligence, in the case of AI, this particular sort of slowdown seems to be relatively not the case, at least what we see today. Okay, so going back to the example of facial recognition AI and it's the local police department's procurement of facial recognition AI, what I showed you earlier is that local police department are buying more facial recognition AI when they experience a lot of local unrest. The question one ask next is that do those local localities that have purchased a lot of facial recognition AI actually effectively are able to use the AI to deter or curb unrest and make it itself more politically stable? So what I'm showing you here is one attempt to try to answer that question. So on the x-axis, I'm showing you sort of the weather conditions which that are conducive to large public outdoor gatherings. So the higher number means that sort of holding everything else fixed, it's more likely you're going to see protests occurring because it's easier to organize protests and political unrest when the weather is nice and not raining or super hot. But when the weather is bad, even if there's a lot of political grievances, protests are unlikely to occur. On the y-axis, I'm showing you sort of the actual sort of unrest occurrence across different localities, separating by two lines The red lines are localities where there's very little AI that's being purchased by the local police department, and the blue curve is those localities that have started to purchase a lot of AI by the local police department. So let's focus on the red line first. The positive slope here in the red lines it means that as the weather becomes more conducive to large public gathering and holding fixed political grievances, indeed you see a higher likelihood of unrest occur. So that's the positive correlation, positive relationship of this curve is depicting. Okay, so suggesting sort of the conducive weather is indeed sort of picking up something that's meaningful. However, if you focus on the blue curve, you see sort of a pretty substantial flattening of the line, which means that when in localities in which there is a lot of AI procurement, even when the weather is fairly good, even when there would be potentially a lot of unrest that's occurring because of grievances are happening, and other localities with similar weather conditions are start to protest, we still don't see that much unrest that occurred in those localities after they have purchased the unrest. Okay, so this flattening of the curve is indicative that sort of the face recognition AI capacity that local governments are accumulating is becoming effective in driving down future unrest, and the future unrest is no longer as responsive to conditions that used to be very predictive of their occurrence. Okay. Now, it could be happening due to deterrence. It could be happening due to very targeted sort of and quick responses by the police when an unrest is just about to break out. We're not able to differentiate between those, but the flattening of the line, which is very substantial in the magnitude, suggests this is indeed sort of helping local governments to make sure unrest are not happening in the future. Okay, so this is, in other words, a technology that's not only demanded by the local governments, but also turned out to be very helpful politically to achieve the political stability that local governments are potentially very much, governments in China are very much interested in. Okay. Now, what about the economic or the innovation side? As I mentioned, sort of, for this ecosystem to be stable in Autocracy 2.0, right, you generate this potential credible commitment among the local among entrepreneurs because the regime demanded those technology. It ultimately, ideally, will help those AI companies to become more innovative, and that's what's necessary to generate this underlying sort of potential innovation and ultimately the growth that the country might be experiencing. Okay, so in this figure, two figures, I'm trying to answer that question by plotting, try to examine sort of the rate of innovation in terms of the new software development by these AI companies, sort of after they have been working with local governments. So the way to read this figure is that on the x-axis, these are quarters relative to the first time these AI companies receiving their first public security AI contracts, and that's the red line, vertical line, and then the quarters afterwards, after the very first contract. Okay, this is relative to other companies who may not be receiving contracts at all, or other companies who might be receiving contracts at a different time. Okay, so those are controlled for in the background. So the flat sort of line, if you focus on the left panel, the government AI software, the flat line suggests that the AI companies are not producing more software leading up to the first government contracts arrive, but they start to produce, innovate a lot more on the government software fronts after the first contract arrive, in part probably because the contract requires them to start to provide new services, and then that's going to bake into the new software innovation, which is going to be somewhat as expected. Okay. What's going to be particularly surprising, though, and very meaningful to think about the overall sort of ecosystem for the AI innovation in China is that if you look at commercial software innovation, which the government don't care about, these are going to be AI, facial recognition AI that allow for retail space payment system, that allow for customer tracking system in the consumer sector, for example. You see a similar pattern where these companies are not producing more, innovating more commercial AI software leading up to the first contract arrive, but almost immediately after they have received their first government procurement contracts with the local police department, these AI companies start to innovate more on the commercial front as well. When the governments are not necessarily demanding those commercial AI software. In other words, the government contracts, the government sort of demanding for this AI software are not only not crowding out commercial innovation, but in fact, it crowding in commercial innovation, and that starts to mean that sort of the overall innovation rate of the entire sector will begin to increase. Why do we think this is happening? Well, we think that in a large part, this is because when the AI firm is working with local police department, by helping local police department analyzing the facial data, for example, the police department are collecting, the firms are receiving an unprecedentedly large amount of data that they can then use to take advantage of as a helpful input for other innovation that also use similar data in the commercial front, because these are going to be very much data intensive innovation as well. So what I show you in this figure on the screen is data complementary software, such as data management software, data storage software, that these AI firms are producing and innovating. And you also see a similar pattern where, as the firms are receiving their first government contracts, they start to innovate more on the data management, data storage software. So suggesting that they indeed are start to handle a large amount of data they wasn't handling before, and that large amount of data is not only helping the government to remain stable by using the facial recognition AI software platform that companies are providing, but very importantly also help the facial recognition company themselves to start innovate on other fronts with similar data. Okay? So this is one such example where in Autocracy 2.0 you can have a mutually sustaining relationship between the political control and innovation and growth. But what I just showed you in the facial recognition AI sector in China is that political instability leads local governments to procure more facial recognition AI, and those facial recognition AI is helping local governments to achieve more political stability into the future. So those are the blue arrow and the black arrow in this plot. This solves some of the credible commitments that the AI entrepreneurs are facing, and it's also allowing local governments to become a lot more efficient to achieve political control using the same amount of information that has collected. The red sort of arrow, the last figure I showed you earlier, is that these government AI procurement is also helping the AI firms because they provide sort of the huge amount of data that the government has been collecting, and that's pushing the AI firms to become innovative not only in the government front but also in the commercial front, and that's going to help the very important sector to be pushed forward and ultimately potentially help the economy to grow. In fact, sort of many of these firms that's in our analysis that I showed you earlier, if we were to plot sort of the global ranking of the performance of the top AI facial recognition AI platforms, a disproportionately large number of the developers of these top AI facial recognition AI developers are Chinese developers. In fact, all top 5 are Chinese developers, and many of these top developers become substantially better at the facial recognition AI tasks after they have been working with the government to provide sort of those basic public security needs of the government. Okay, so again, this mutually reinforcing relationship exemplified in this AI sector is an important component in which Autocracy 2.0 in the entrepreneurship part of this component that helps resolve the credible commitment problem and help resolve some of the information challenges of the regime is facing. Okay, so with the last sort of 7-8 minutes that I have, I want to spend some time to talk a little bit about where China is heading next. What does Autocracy 3.0 looks like? Okay. Now you probably are sort of thinking in the back of your head a lot about what keeps Autocracy 2.0 a particularly unique political equilibrium is that it comes with high growth. high growth provides the perception of economic opportunity. The high growth provides the perception of upper mobility. High growth provides various opportunities for entrepreneurs and local politicians to act upon. And that's going to be the building block of what keeps Autocracy 2.0 a viable equilibrium and politically sort of feasible in the last a few decades. It's not a stable equilibrium when those economic fundamentals are being challenged. In particular, as the economic growth might be slowing down, not necessarily stagnate, but as the economic sort of headwind starts to become blowing, Autocracy 2.0 is going to start to face challenges, and then we might see transition away from the Autocracy 2.0 equilibrium. I suspect domestically there are going to be two paths forward for China in the current sort of environment where the economic growth slows down and likely going to remain sort of fairly slow for the foreseeable future. If the regime the first path is the regime opts for more economic vibrancy and really want to double down on growth, it's going to move away or require itself to move away from more security and political control. In this case, the Autocracy 2.0 is going to transition into Autocracy 3.0 by allocating or diffusing more political rights to the citizens, to the entrepreneurs, and potentially even allowing for some genuine reallocation of political power to the masses. This is the democratization or early stage democratization that sort of one observes in many other parts of the world, and that's one potential path for Autocracy 2.0 to transition away when the economy slows down. Now, there's obviously another path, and that's the opposite path, where the regime can choose to not go for economic vibrancy, to not go for the growth, but choose the other side of the equation for the trade-off, but going for more purchase more for security and control in response to the economic and social headwind. So in this case, Autocracy 2.0 might look similar in some cases to this 1.0 earlier manifestations, but potentially with the aid of new technology, with the aid of more efficient sort of technology, but it's going to start to look more closer to a 1.0 version. Okay. Now, unfortunately, recent trends in China suggest we might be facing a latter scenario. The mismatch of economic downturn and the long-run aspiration of the population really start to generate tension between how much credible commitment that the regime can voice to the citizens in terms of future economic gain from the system. Recent purges of a lot of the political bureaucrats is breaking the incentive through the political tournament, so the political commitments among politicians is also slowing down. The fact that regimes are expropriating a lot of the private sector innovators, in particular in some of the tech sectors, is eroding very importantly the credible commitments the partial credible commitments that has established among the private sector. So in all three aspects, citizens, political bureaucrats, and the private sector entrepreneurs, we see sort of a movement towards more control and moving away from the 2.0 sort of equilibrium that we have seen. Okay? So that's the domestic sort of dynamics that I foresee. Now, the international dynamics might play out very differently. As China emphasizes more security and control, it might lead itself to become more security-focused and confrontational in international politics, which the rest of the world might see repercussions. When China explicitly used international policy to try to increase its own security and control. There might be also a subtle version in which the market, the markets and economic opportunities that exist beyond Chinese border is allowing Chinese government to resolve some of this domestic political tensions by unleashing some of the supply of its domestic producers, for example, to the global market. That's going to resolve some of for example, the domestic sort of unemployment tensions and so on. Again, the international community is going to see repercussions. And all this is sort of come at a time where the Chinese economy has grown for decades. So the massive scale means that anything that China is doing, either being sort of more security focused confrontational international policies, or simply sort of policies that meant to help domestic politics that wasn't meant to be confrontational internationally, it's going to have a very large impact globally just because of China's scale. Okay. I want to go back to the AI example and show you two final sort of facts on how this might have international repercussions. In a recent project, we have been collecting as comprehensive as we can all the global trade of facial recognition AI products. So who's buying AI sort of software around the world and who's selling AI software around the world. Okay, so in these two figures I put in this figure, I'm showing you sort of on the top panel the exports of China's facial recognition AI to the rest of the world, and on the bottom panel the exports of the facial recognition AI companies from the United States. Okay, so there are two sort of observation I want to make. First is that China by far exports more facial recognition AI, one very important frontier technology than the second largest exporter of the United States, which means if we measure by the volume of exports, China has a very large competitive advantage, and this is actually, even China is an export powerhouse. This is fairly rare in the frontier technology sector. And second note here on the political economy repercussion is that in this figure, I color code who's buying facial recognition AI from either China or the US. If the destination country is a mature democracy, I'm coding that the trade deal as the blue arrow. If the destination country is a weak democracy, unstable democracy, or a autocracy themselves, I'm coding that trade deal as red. Okay, so let's focus on the US first. Now, for the United States, 70%, about 75% of the total number of facial recognition AI deals are exported towards other mature democracies. This is, in fact, very similar to any other frontier technology that you see in the trading system, because these are expensive products. Democracies tend to be rich and can afford those products, and you see sort of a disproportionately large share of democracy buying those products. And facial recognition AI from the US is similar, in a large part similar to that. For China, however, you see sort of the ratio is much more tilted towards weak democracies and autocracies. About half of Chinese facial recognition AI exports are being exported to non-democratic countries, and that's very different from how the rest of the world is being exporting this technology. In fact, if we look at sort of the relative rate in which autocracies are buying frontier technology from China for all the 16 sectors of frontier technology that OECD has designated, facial recognition AI is the only sector we see a disproportionately large fraction of autocracies buying this from China relative to other regimes. Where for things such as steam turbine for electric vehicles, for example, we don't see sort of a political regime distinction. But AI seems to be one of such technology where autocracy is demanding more. So what I meant to convey here is that this is one notion of China's political repercussion, where a technology that's been developed domestically for domestic political purposes that potentially has other demands that's being met or being faced by other parts of the world in terms of autocracy, which may not have the capacity to innovate on their own, but they can start to use the global trading system to purchase this technology and use the similar capacity to help stabilize its own political regime. And as China is moving towards the global frontier in both the technology and trade and manufacturing, and the volume of these activities is going to start to have a global repercussion. Okay, so given the time, let me sort of conclude by saying that what I hopefully sort of showed you over the last sort of 45 minutes is that Autocracy 2.0, which we see quite vividly in China, is quite different from the traditional autocracy 1.0 that one's very familiar with, that use coercion, that uses fear to remain stable. That while still exists in China, it's very much not the model reason that the regime remains stable and the left alone regime remains sort of vibrant in this economic performance. Autocracy 2.0 it sort of uses economic incentive and technology to resolve some of the credible commitments and establish political control, stable political control in an information-rich environment. Two of the most fundamental challenges that any autocratic government has to face. As we stand today, China is really at the crossroads beyond moving beyond autocracy 2.0 as the economic is beginning to slow down. While I describe sort of a likely scenario where the regime is choosing more control over allocating more political rights and economic vibrancy, one should always know that there's always another opposite route moving beyond autocracy 2.0, which is a different equilibrium that allocating more political rights that's moving even further away from the control parts of the equilibrium or the trade-off towards more economic vibrancy, which is going to look like the path for democratization that many regimes around the world are embarking on, and China potentially would also have an option for that route, but at the moment it's not taking that particular path beyond autocracy 2.0. Okay, so let me end here, and very much looking forward to the comments and your questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that really wide-ranging presentation. We're just going to go across to Professor Ase Ito for his comments and questions.
Yeah, my name is Ase Ito. Associate Professor at the Institute of Social Science at the University of Tokyo. So thank you, David, for your wonderful lectures. It truly remind me of your brilliant lectures at the Harvard Yard. Thank you for bringing such a fascinating lecture to the University of Tokyo. So David's lecture explained how the autocracy overcome the two fundamental challenges. So it's a really clear argument. So I'm very good at asking stupid questions. So let me raise four of them. So first question is about the timing of the update, what you call the autocracy 2.0. So it seems there are two basic elements of the update. So one of the update is depending on the bureaucratic capabilities, and the other thing, the digitalization to execute the kind of strategic censorship. So if that is the case, the former the element that the bureaucratic capabilities may have been taking shape as early as the 1980s. So including the local bureaucrats tournament model that which has been exemplified, the seminar work by Professor Jolie and others. So on the other hand, so digitalization, digital censorship didn't really take off until the 2010s. You know that Professor Gary King's influential work on the censorship in the Chinese SNS. So if that is the case, I think the move from autocracy 1.0 to 2.0 took, let's say, 2 or 3 decades. It's quite a long time, maybe from 1990s to 2010. So there was a kind of period that I would call the version 1.5 because the bureaucratic capability is well developed, but still not enough digital capabilities has been realized yet. So would you I just wonder, what do you think about this kind of interpretation? That's first question. Then second question is about the limitation of the 2.0. So you introduced the wonderful empirical research on the AI facial recognition innovation in China. So but I just wonder if there are any bias or distortion that such a regime result in the innovation system. Even though we saw we see, you know, kind of march of Chinese innovation from the electric vehicle, robotics, generative AI, whatever. But the do you think is there any kind of the distortion or limitation of the Chinese innovation model? That's the second question. The third question is about the I would like to ask about the recent argument related to Chinese historical foundations. So as you know well, I guess the scholar like the Wang Yuhua at the Harvard, Huang Yashen at the MIT, Xu Chenggang at the Stanford. These, you know, the prominent researchers have been published a lot of the books on the Chinese historical research. Try to understand how Chinese authoritarian regime um, um, from kind of the longer historical perspective. So, so given that, I would like to ask that to what extent do you think, you know, historical elements or factors play a role in the evolution of Chinese autocracy from 1.0 to 2.0? That's my second question. Then the sorry, that's a third question. Then the last one may be a bit sensitive at this moment, but I want to ask about the possible implication for the democratic countries, including United States or even Japan. So you may know that the Professor Daniel Treisman at the UCLA. He's a political scientist. He is a well-known researcher on the autocratic nations, and he's one of the founders of the idea that the informational autocrats. Then he recently researched on the Mr. Trump, even publishing the NBER working paper on Donald Trump's word using kind of textual analysis method. So in recent article, Professor Daniel Treisman, he wrote that the understanding autocratic techniques may help Americans to preserve the real things. One sentence. In Japan, actually, as well, that there is kind of growing concern about the potential Japanese government intervention to the academia, for example. So, I don't think this argument what you have talking, it's not really much a distant issue for us. So either. So um, do, do do you see any possible synergy or implication to Japan or even United States? That's the last question. But yeah, I know that's very hard to answer. So if you, I would be very happy to hear your thought. Even on just one of these questions. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your wonderful lecture. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, yes, please, your response.
Okay. So thank you for your questions. So I mean, these are, you know, gigantic questions that I'm not sure I will have satisfying answer to all or if any of them. But let me try to share some thoughts on some of the questions. So your question about the timing, the way I think about that is that there's, well, sort of, you know, I think maybe like the misnomer of 1.0, 2.0 suggests there is a regime shifts from one to the other and it's very sudden. But the way I see this is that this is a very gradual process. It happened in many parts of the system. And I don't think sort of necessarily that when the regime was at 1.0, when the reform opening started in 1978, there were a momentarily shifts that 2.0 is the way to go, and then everything shifted. So it's very much sort of a gradually equilibrium shifted towards that. And as you said, sort of it takes several decades for many of the elements to fall in places. Now, I do want to emphasize that there are things that starts to pop up very early on. So so obviously you had to wait until 2010 or 2015 to start to see facial recognition as to be played. But for instance, sort of the introduction of village election, the ability for local newspaper to start to report on certain negative information, those things introduced sort of in the late 80s and early 90s, all in the forms of try to resolve some of the information challenges where harsh control is depriving the regime of. So of course the technology is adding more of that, but it's certainly this is a very gradual process, and I will say that it started quite early. If you think about sort of the whole campaign about being rich is something to be proud of, that the government started in the 80s. That again very much is a campaign that tried to align citizens with the stability and growth of the system. And that started in the 80s, and certainly it took sort of decades to really stabilize that. So the timing, I very much think about this as a holistic sort of movement from one version or one equilibrium of how autocracy achieves stability to another version, and that in China took several decades. The second thing related to your second question, which I want to emphasize, is that when I mentioned sort of autocracy faces two challenges: the credible commitments and the lack of information, which are two very fundamental challenges. Autocracy 2.0 resolves some of this, or choosing a very different trade-off along the trade-off between information versus control, or power versus credibility, but it never fully resolves, and it is never able to fully resolve that. The only type of regime that can fully resolve credible commitments and fully provides the sort of the efficient provision of information, at least theoretically, is democracy. So unless you move all the way to democracy, there's just sort of from a pure conceptual perspective, there's always going to be this is always going to be the second best solution, that you're not going to be fully unleash the economic potential by completely resolving the credible commitments. So all this is to say that without sort of reallocating political power, how much limit can one push to generate economic vibrancy by allowing for partial credible commitments, by allowing for some information to flow while political control is still remained. So this means that economic sort of performance is still going to be underperforming relative to the potential democracy counterfactual, if we think about in a pure sort of conceptual perspective. So there's going to be still sort of a political distortion from that perspective, and also sort of from innovation perspective, that this I think more closely to the question that you're asking. Well, in the case of AI, facial recognition AI, show that that does not seem to be the case where when governments are demanding facial recognition AI for political surveillance, because it uses facial data, the facial data is very useful for developing a lot of commercial software. So we see flourishing commercial markets in the facial recognition space. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of crowding out or distortion there. It does not suggest the distortion is not happening in other frontier technology or other technology in which sort of the shareable inputs such as data are used in a different manner. So we don't have too much empirical evidence beyond this one example. But what always should worry about sort of potential political distortion in both the rate of innovation, rate of growth, but also the direction and where innovation is occurring. Your third question about history, this is a difficult one. I think the way that I am intentionally framing the talk today is that this autocracy 1.0 is a model where we see in many parts of the world. It addresses two issues that any autocracy faces. Autocracy 2.0, in the way that China is exemplified in the last couple of years, resolve the two issues in a generic way that moving in the other direction. none of this is China specific in the sense of had you not had China's civil exam system in the last sort of 600 years, you will not be able to move towards that equilibrium. Now, this is sort of, of course, intellectually very much simplifying, but I just want I guess, at least to be stimulating that, I don't think this movement towards 1.0 to 2.0 and this 2.0 autocracy system, certainly sort of China is a very unique one, but it's not sort of necessarily only sort of constrained by China's own history and own institutional sort of idiosyncrasies, where we can potentially see other autocracy moving in a similar direction. Maybe not using the same mechanism, but that sort of option is always available. I don't have too much to say about what this means for the U.S. and the rest of democracy. I think that the basic sort of lesson that one learns looking at the global politics in the last sort of decade is that we have always sort of learned in at school that democracy is a stable equilibrium, is absorbing state. The end of history suggests the country moved towards democracy and it's going to end with mature democracy. Now, the end of history probably occurred too early, and we certainly see sort of, and what I hope this talk is try to at least invoke the idea that autocracy can be stable as well. And autocracy can be not only stable, but can be economically vibrant and can even be innovative. And autocracy 2.0, that type of equilibrium may not necessarily sort of transition into democracy. We may also see democracy transition out of democracy into something that looks like autocracy 2.0. I don't think this is happening anywhere close to that in the U.S. or other parts of the world in the democracy world yet. But that option, at least in theory, always exists, which is frightening, but intellectually it certainly provides more options when we think about sort of the path for political regime changes. That's not always going from non-democracy to democracy.
Okay, Professor Ito, any response?
Oh yeah, such a wonderful reflections. Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, you emphasize the more universal mechanism behind the upgrading. So that's a wonderful implication, not just looking at the Chinese context, but also there's a global implication of your research. So thank you so much. I guess there are a lot of the question from floor's audience. So I just wish to pass to the other questions. Thank you so much.
Yes, we've had a number of interesting questions posed by the audience, so I'm going to suppress my urge to ask my own questions for now. So the first question I'll ask, or actually I might ask two related questions. The first is how, from a member of the audience asks, how will you factor in the geopolitical and international developments presently in the making or unmaking of China Autocracy 3.0? And a related question, do you think Trump tariffs or trade war between the USA and China can greatly affect your likely scenario from Autocracy 2.0 to Autocracy 3.0?
Yeah, so two thoughts on that one. The first is that I sort of mentioned quite briefly in the end, I do think the international dynamics for autocracy 3.0 for China, regardless of where it's going, it's safe to assume that its economy is not going to shrink. It might grow slowly, but it's not going to shrink. But that's going to have a very large implication for the rest of the world in the following sense. Now, we have been fortunate from a democracy perspective that for the last 50 years since the World War II, the world order is that the richest country in the world are liberal democracy. They dominate the global trading system. They dominate the global economic system, and sort of as a result, the global political system as well. So that very much is a liberal democratic world order. China emerging as a global trade powerhouse means that this is for the first time a non-democratic country starts to occupy not just a trivial amount, but a very important and increasingly dominant amount of the global trading and global economic system. This is going to have a very large implications for the geopolitical order, because clearly China is not going to be compatible with a lot of the foundations for the liberal democratic order that World War II, post World War II has laid down. I showed you that you can have such challenges unintentionally simply because China is exporting certain products that may not be politically neutral. China can also deliberately use its economic power, such as its threat to withdraw certain products, such as rare earths, for example, to leverage its economic power to achieve geopolitical goals, which again we see very much at play. The part I actually skipped in the end of the talk is that in a recent project we try to measure for all countries, pairs in the world, how much power country can exert on each other based on the trade structure. If a country unilaterally disrupt trade, how much damage it can do to another country. Now, that damage may not be does not necessarily mean power, because if I disrupt trade towards you and you have a bigger disruption that you can generate towards me by retaliating, I'm not going to generate as much damage. So it's the asymmetry in damage that matters for how much power. If I can do a lot of damage on you and you don't have much to retaliate, so that means I have a lot of quote unquote trade power. When we measure this, China has not only very large power, but also very noticeable increasing power in this regard in the trade domain. So this is going to be the undertone for which the tariff discussions, all trade disputes and trade use as a weapon, economic dependence use as a potentially as a geopolitical weapon are going to be undertone, because we are dealing with a economic entity which it has a lot of asymmetric power over the other country, and its own political institutions are not necessarily compatible with the liberal democratic order which has been prevailing over the last couple of decades. So these dynamics are I think are going to change and almost certainly going to change regardless of China's own domestic economic circumstances, because the size of the country is going to remain large regardless of its own economic slowdown, and the global the economic system has to learn how to deal with of a country that's both non-democratic but also economically extremely powerful.
And just to return to the second question, how would all of that play into these dynamics that you're talking about with transition from 2.0 to 3.0?
So from 2.0 to 3.0, it means that for the rest of the world, this would be for the first time you will have no. So let me maybe step back. When I begin the talk, I mentioned that there is a conventional wisdom that non-democratic countries are incompatible with high growth and innovation. There is a related conventional wisdom that as the world become integrated into the trading into the global trading order since the World War II, the global trade integration, global economic integration is going to start to promote and stimulate more democratization and liberal democratic transition. And in fact, we do see that for many countries for several decades. And many countries benefit from global trade and start to transition. Now, that's all happening under a period in which all the major trading powers and partners you're trading with are the liberal democracies themselves. So then back to the question of now, for the first time, you oftentimes the country's main trading partner and the country that have largest trading balance or dependence on is a non-democracy, which means you can potentially have a lot of the integration to the global trading network that's not necessarily inducing you to transition to democracy, but actually inducing you to either stabilize this as autocracy, because you can import technology from another autocracy that uses technology to remain stable, or that means that you're going to become more geopolitically aligned with your trading partner, which in this case is not a democratic one. So that's going to fundamentally changes how the rest of the world is going to operate. So the autocracy 2.0, while in China has two versions, two directions I mentioned, for the rest of the world it's a very different one where where it's a very big disruption for the post-war liberal democratic world order.
Concerning sort of scenario. Okay, we have another question here, basically about the implications of Autocracy 2.0 for patterns of economic growth in China, basically. So Taylor Willoughby asks, does the system of promoting lower level bureaucrats and involving and improving funding based on regional economic growth lead to a higher likelihood of risky economic activity that could affect China as a whole? For example, risky investments, falsified economic reports, reduction in production quality to save costs, etc.
Right. That's a great question, and there's a lot of recent research on precisely that question. And I don't think we fully understand the full landscape of the implications. So the positive side is quite straightforward. That without sort of a lot of institutional formal institutional setup, a local politician, you assume that they have a lot of power to extract rents and potentially become the grabbing hands, and that prevents local economy from growing. You don't see that happening in China. In fact, sort of a lot of local politicians are eager, hardworking political entrepreneurs to try to help local firms to grow. And the reason they're very eager and incentivized to do so is because the more they can help local firms to grow, the more local firms contributing to local GDP and local economy, and that's going to help their own political promotion. That's going to align the interests. And so this, even if they can be the grabbing hand, they will not be, because they want to help the firms and provide sort of all the resources to help them. So sort of empirically we see that as a very strong regularity over the last sort of 20 years, and it has quite stopped it for the last sort of 6 or 7 years. But up until then, we see a very strong pattern of that. Now, this obviously would generate all sorts of distortions, right? You align local politicians to maximize local GDP. Now, maximizing local GDP may not necessarily mean it will maximize national GDP, right? So there could be economic policies or social policies that will have large social and regional spillover. Local politicians may not have any interest to do, because that's going to help my competitors, and I'm not interested in that, because I want to actually outbeat my competitors' growth. I want to only maximize growth locally. So there's going to be distortion from that perspective. There's going to be distortions in the sense of, if I can inject infrastructure, if I can inject sort of investments, if I can inject sort of certain fixed government sort of spending to generate growth, stimulate growth, rather than say consumption, I'm eager to do that as a local politician, because that's going to really speed up the economic growth, and that might be distortionary from a national sort of growth perspective. There's always the question of making up the economic status, which empirical evidence suggests while that's happening is happening to quite a mild degree. On that, my read of the literature, empirical literature on this question, is that the first order effects is that this really stimulated growth and aligned interest. And the distortionary effects that people have been able to identify empirically about sort of regional competition, crowd out sort of business stealing, or I want to take away your firm to my region. I'm not going to promote policy that's going to generate national growth because I really want to have a higher relative growth. Sort of the shifting in different investment modes. These sort of distortionary sort of behaviors are quite second order. It's happening, but it's not sort of completely washing out the first order incentive effects that these tournaments are generating. But this is an area where active research are happening, try to document the full extent. And then also certainly we see sort of the tournament structure is to a large extent sort of breaking down in the last 5 or 6 years, and what's the effect of that on GDP performance. And that's something that I think within a few years, I think we'll have a lot of information and data to analyze.
Okay, a question on the vulnerabilities of Autocracy 2.0. So the person asks, It appears that Autocracy 2.0 functions in conjunction with an AI integrated surveillance system. In the event of such a scenario, Autocracy 2.0 would be rendered significantly vulnerable in the face of the malfunction of AI integrated surveillance system by some means. What is your perspective on this matter?
That's an interesting question. I don't think the vulnerability is unique to the use of AI or technology in that regard. In fact, when the regime is trying to allocate more of its ability to control let's say the population to either the local politicians or in the recent years to technology, but also still very much uses a lot of local human capacity and so on. It always have vulnerability. In other words, it always needs to resolve some of the incentive problem. I need to make sure that the people, local bureaucrats who I'm putting in charge of to maintain political stability are not themselves going up to revolt against me. The technology or the tech companies who I'm allocating or procure a lot of the security contracts with and have a lot of access to the government sort of operation and government's data are not themselves becoming revolting to the regime. So that control of both to the firm and to the politician is always going to be a sort of an issue. So I guess my point is that Autocracy 2.0, while it's an equilibrium, it's certainly not a stable equilibrium. So it's a period in which the regime has chosen to let go of some of the control to allocate more rights and power to the economic agents, political agents, local political agents, and so on. And it can very well push the control backwards and retain the control to the central level, as we see today, where the governments are potentially worried about local sort of firms or certain tech companies are having too much power, too much sort of ability to sway the regime's ability to stay stable, and that's going to push them against sort of push the government towards controlling more of those firms. So I think those are always going to be a pendulum swirling forces, and we see that in the case of AI, but it's certainly not unique to AI. The vulnerability is, I will say, that very much, regime survivalhood, which is a fundamental aspect of the regime's vulnerability, I think is a paramount objective or concern for any autocratic governments, in the same way that re-election and winning sort of political supports is a fundamental concern for any democratic governments. So I think those are just the fundamental political incentives that we have to keep in mind.
Okay, we have a question which I think you answered to some extent towards the end of your presentation, but I might ask it anyway because it might be interesting for you to expand on it a little bit. So Wan Du asks, thank you very much for sharing the timely analysis. Do you observe diffusion of the new autocracy paradigms from China to other countries, along with the dissemination of China's technologies and economic diplomacy?
Right. So again, let me be clear that what I will say next is only based on the evidence we'll have collected on facial recognition AI. So it's certainly not a general statement. But in the case of facial recognition AI, where we do have data to look at, I can provide you with a finding. So I showed you towards the end of the talk that China is the global leader in exporting facial recognition AI, reflecting that it has large competitive advantage in this technology, and many of the Chinese firms are actually at the global frontier. So if you want to buy the best facial recognition AI products, you have to buy it from Chinese firms. Chinese firms are selling this disproportionately to local governments in other parts of the world that are not mature democracies. So they're either autocracies or weak democracies themselves that can potentially benefit from civilians technology such as the one that's being developed and used in China. We also find, and then this is the part that did not show in the talk today, is that local governments around foreign governments around the world are disproportionately more likely to purchase facial recognition AI from China when they themselves have experienced political unrest. So this is very much this mirror image, mirroring sort of what's happening in China, where Chinese local governments experiencing unrest, they procure AI from a Chinese firm, and then that AI is potentially useful for political stability, as we show. Foreign governments, foreign non-democratic governments, when they experience unrest, are looking into upgrading their technology, and in many cases, they're upgrading through a Chinese source. We also see that purchasing of Chinese facial recognition AI software is coming along with a broad erosion of local institutional quality and democratic quality. Not necessarily meaning that sort of, this is actually reducing, AI is reducing local political institution per se, but seems to be a part of a package strategy where local governments, foreign governments, non-Chinese governments are using technology from China along with other metrics to hone in on their political control and stabilize its regime. So this is one such example. I should also be very clear that I don't think we have any evidence to suggest that China is selling this technology deliberately or explicitly with an aim to spread political institution. So this is simply, you can think about this as happening simply as a market mechanism where technology existed, technology was developed for particular political purposes. You can purchase those technologies through just simple standard global trade, and China does not need to actively promote those technology, and the country who have similar demand can go in and purchase those. And as long as China is willing to sell them, and the United States is also very much willing to sell some of this technology to a non-democratic country as well, and the countries can purchase technology to benefit. So I don't think we have this, we have evidence to say that this is a deliberate diplomatic sort of forces that China has used to try to promote autocracy around the world. But part of the geopolitical repercussion is that you have a innovative powerhouse that's non-democratic. It's going to innovate, at least in part, on technology that helps autocracy to remain stable. And to the extent those technologies are tradable, the more integrated you are with the global trading system, the more accessible those technologies are to you, and autocracies around the world can use this technology to enhance their own capacity, which at least in the facial recognition AI case, we see that's the case.
That makes sense. Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. So I'll just ask this one. Taking into account the patterns of control expanding policies in regions such as the South China Sea, Xinjiang, and Tibet, as well as the harsh domestic controls during events such as the COVID-19 pandemic, which of the two forms of autocracy 3.0 do you think is more likely? And I think it sounds pretty clear what the questioner thinks.
Right. So I think, it's conceivable that what happened with maybe let me step back a little bit. So it's often the case that when you're under large public health crisis or public sort of large sort of natural disaster, and COVID is certainly one of such that we have recently experienced. Restriction on civil liberty, restriction on freedom, and using technology to facilitate those restrictions oftentimes is helpful to at least in the short run, enhance the state's ability to resolve those disaster, crises, and emergencies. So to some extent, I do think that COVID has changed or speed up the transition in which there is a increasing need for control and increasing need for civilians, not politically, but out of a public health crisis, and that has unleashed demand and unleashed sort of upgrading for all levels of infrastructure of political control, both in China, but also we see in many other parts of the world. And even when COVID has sort of very much has ended as a public health crisis, those increased control and those increased sort of reconcentration of political power that meant to deal with a public health crisis has not sort of restored to the status quo. And that might push sort of in the language of today's talk, autocracy 2.0 to go back to autocracy 1.0 with the aid of technology and with abrupt sort of interruption due to a crisis.
See. Okay, well, that's all that we have time for today. So I'd just like to extend my thanks and Tokyo College's thanks for Professor Young and Professor Ito for joining us today. And of course, all of you who tuned in. So we'll see you at the next Tokyo College webinar. Thank you.
Great. Thank you all.